I arrived in Canada on June 11, 2002. My life, before I came to Canada, I really had a good life. I had a good job. As I mentioned, I was a human resources director for a large company which employed 2,000 people. I received papers from immigration saying that you qualify to go to Canada. Well, I was surprised. I said, is this it? Am I really going to Canada? It was cold. It was really a shock for me. I mean, the difference from coming from a warm country. At that time, when I came as a student, was leaving my children. So my name is Fari. It's a short for Fari, which means rejoice in my own language. I was born and bred in Zimbabwe. I grew up in the rural area with my grandparents and my sister. I went to my school in Zimbabwe. First school was primary school, which was education from grade 1 to grade 7. And then following that, I went to high school. And I completed high school at what would be grade 12 here in Canada. I didn't go to university immediately. I had to start working, and I started looking for a job in the city. My first job was like a sales assistant, selling clothes in a women's boutique. After that, I worked in a laboratory screening for cancer cells for women, cervical cancer. Then thought, well, I needed a change. So I went back to school and I did a secretarial diploma. So my life, before I came to Canada, I really had a good life. I had a good job. As I mentioned, I was a human resources director for a large company which employed 2,000 people. It was manufacturing 2,000 people. And I was responsible for 2 plants, which were about 8 hours of drive apart. Okay. So that was my job. My life was really good. I had everything. I had a company car. I had my own house, which was paid off. My children were in school. So my life, when I started working, was pretty good for someone who grew up in a rural area, right? Moving to the city and really creating a better life for myself. So yeah, my life in Zimbabwe was really good. Previously, I had been in Canada in 1991. I came to Canada as an exchange student, and that was through the Canadian CEDA International Development Agency. And I was in Canada for 1 semester. I had no idea what life would be like in Canada. And especially when I landed at Pearson on, I think it was January the 1st, it was snowing, it was cold. It was really a shock for me. I mean, the difference from coming from a warm country to a cold country. I didn't know what to expect, right? I didn't know how I would, fit in a Canadian, especially Canadian college. You know, that was really strange for me. And also being a minority, right, especially in Peterborough, I felt self-conscious, right, because of my color too, right? I didn't know how people perceived me. And sometimes people will say, well, why did you come to Peterborough, right? And I say, well, I came for education, right? So my first impression of Canada, it was really difficult for me to get used to, even communicating because of my accent, right? Um, some people didn't really understand me, and I felt self-conscious, being in Canada. But eventually, I managed to get used to the environment, and I had a friend from the college who was very good to me, who showed me around, took me to Niagara Falls, and then also took me to shopping, because the first time I went into a grocery store or one of these big superstores, I was just amazed of the amount of food, and the variety and the brands, right? And thought, okay, which one do I choose, right? So it was all those things which are really strange to me. I think emotionally for me at that time when I came as a student was leaving my children, because I left my children, they were very young, and I left them with my brother-in-law. So it was really hard for me to be over here for the whole semester with my children. And also not getting used to the environment. Fortunately, I met a couple from Zimbabwe. We're already living in Peterborough. And I knew them way back, but I didn't know that they were in Canada. So the strange things that happened was I was waiting for the bus, and the wife was driving by, and somehow she recognized my face. Although I was covered, it was cold and I had my hat on, she remembered me. And then she called Zimbabwe to one of my relatives and said, hey, is Fari in Zimbabwe or is she away? And they said, no, Fari is in Canada. So she said, yeah, I think I saw her on the street, right? So I connected with that family, and emotionally they were there for me. I felt like I had a connection in Canada. I wasn't alone. There was somebody who was there for me. But again, I did struggle, with my children being away from me. And I used to get, little letters from them. Mommy, when are you coming home? Mommy, what are you going to bring us? Winter semester, where I started I studied at Fleming College. Okay. It was just one semester, and I was doing human resources. So that was my first time in Canada. So when I left, a friend of mine said, well, how about coming to live in Canada? And I said, no way am I going to come to Canada. It's too cold. Right? So I went back. Zimbabwe used to be really very good economically, right? But things really started getting worse because of the political situation and the decisions that were being made. So it was very difficult now to get like foreign currency to pay for my daughter who was in the States. Although I had the money in our local currency, but now converting that money to US dollars was becoming very difficult. And also things were really becoming expensive. So life at that time wasn't really promising anything for myself and my children. And what I wanted was quality of life and a better education for my two girls. So I did submit my application for permanent residency. I didn't really think that I would get there. So when I received papers from immigration saying that you qualify to go to Canada, well, I was surprised. I said, is this it? Am I really going to Canada? But then what really got to me was that I had to find enough money, because they said, okay, for you to move to Canada with your two girls, you need 20,000 Canadian dollars. And I thought, where am I going to get that money, right? But then I had an apartment which I sold, and I got some US dollars. And also my company, we had shares for staff. So I sold my shares and I got the money. So I did manage to get the 20,000 Canadian dollars for us to move to Canada. We got our papers to come to Canada in June 2002. I moved to Canada with my two daughters. I don't really think that there was really anything that I could say was very difficult first time. But I think the second time when I moved to Canada permanently, the hardest part was leaving my sister. That was really hard for me because it's just three of us, my elder sister and my half sister. So it was leaving my sister, who had been my anchor the whole of my life, because our parents passed away when we were very young. So that was really difficult for me, leaving my sister. So when I came to Canada, I was, as I mentioned, I was a human resources director. And when I came to Canada and started looking for a job, it was really difficult for me to get a job in my own field, right? My first job in Canada, I was a babysitter because I couldn't get any jobs, right? I had applied for many jobs, human resources jobs, but I didn't have Canadian experience. So many employers were not, willing to offer me a job. So that really affected my confidence, But I took a babysitter job because I needed income. Okay. After that, my next job was in a call center. That was a very hard job for me. Fortunately for me, when I came from Zimbabwe, because English was my second language, so that wasn't a problem for me. But for many of the newcomers, the immigrants that I have supported, language is a huge barrier. In most cases, with my clients, I had to use a translation app to start with for me to be able to communicate with them. So that's the greatest barrier that I see for newcomers. For young people, I think it's easier for them to learn the language than the older people. I remember when the Ukrainian-Russia war started, and we started getting many Ukrainians coming through. I remember my first client. This was a lady who had come with her family to Canada from Ukraine. And this lady had a very senior position in Ukraine. But when they came to Canada, she had no English at all, right? And she had to start afresh. She started in a position which was not related to her educational level at all. But surprisingly, she embraced that position. She worked in that job. She didn't think that, well, I had this senior position in Ukraine, I can't do this job. No, she did that job. So for me, what struck me was how humble, immigrants are, for them who had so many senior positions in their own countries, but they come to a new country and they are prepared, they humble themselves, they accept lower level jobs because they want to start a new life in Canada. So again, as I said, it's really people who are coming here to so humbling, right, for them to take these lower level jobs. But also, I see with many newcomers, their commitment to work, right? They really want to work. They show up at work, okay? They are not choosy, okay? They will take a job where they can get working experience in Canada. They are willing to volunteer. They are willing to do cleaning jobs. They are willing to do anything that can help them to put a foot in the door so that they can get a better life for themselves. What they don't realize is that some of the immigrants are coming from traumatic situations, right? Based on what is happening in their countries. So they come back here that they've really lived traumatic experiences that people really don't understand. The other thing as well is culture. Culture. People are coming from different cultures, right? And they come here, they are not used to the Canadian culture. So some of the things that they may do, may seem very strange to Canadians, or they may be perceived as being rude to Canadians, but it's the way of their culture, right? I'll give you an example. So some of the cultures, like the people who come from my own country, from Canada, right? We respect authority, right? We don't challenge authority. We listen to authority. But here in Canada, you are encouraged to express your views, to be open at work, to contribute. So when you are in a meeting and you are quiet, right, and you are waiting for someone to stop speaking so that you can speak, right, people may think that you have nothing to contribute. But that's not the case, because in your culture, you wait, right, to listen to people in higher authority. So those perceptions about, immigrants is because people, they don't understand the culture, right? Because as an immigrant, you are trying to assimilate yourself into a culture which is very new to you, and you learn day by day, how things are done in Canada. And you try at least to remember that so that you don't use your own ways that you learned in your own country. So for me, I'll give you an example of right now. I have grandchildren. I have 3 granddaughters, right? They are taught in school, right, to express themselves. They are taught in school to ask why. Why are you asking me to do this? Why do I have to clean? Okay, why do I have to do the chores, right? In my culture, children know, all right? If I tell you to clean, you're going to clean. You're not going to ask me why I have to clean, right? So those are some of the differences that I have seen. And also with Zimbabweans, right? So I'm Zimbabwean, and there's a Zimbabwean community here in Canada. What I've heard and what I've seen is parents struggling to adjust to the Canadian environment, to balance their own values and their culture with the Canadian values of the Canadian society where their children are growing up. So that is really a struggle. And I would think that is the same with other communities as well of immigrants. Trying to balance your culture, trying to raise your children in a different culture whilst still they are retaining their own values. So when you're starting over, sometimes you wonder whether you have really prepared yourself. Okay. When I say that, it's preparing yourself mentally, right? Because you don't know what you are going to face, right? And you might come up with expectations, and reality is different. Okay, I came thinking that, I had a human resources job. If there are so many human resources, jobs in Canada, I should be able to come here and get a job quickly. But that wasn't the case. Okay, because my Zimbabwean experience was not the Canadian experience, right? So my expectation of what life was going to be for me professionally was different from the reality. Although eventually I did manage to get a human resources job, right, and do well, but that was a bit of a challenge for me. Yeah, I was a human resources manager, and then human resources, industrial relations, labor relations consultant. Yeah, I worked for the past, I can say, maybe 15 years here in Canada in that profession. I only left when my last job, they were downsizing, and I lost my position. After that, I still wanted to be in human resources. I started looking for a job again in human resources, but I wasn't successful. And also, I was older, not young anymore, right? So I decided to go back to school. So I went back to school and completed a career development practitioner program in 2017. And then after that, I started working in this field that I am right now as an employment counselor. So I switched from being in human resources to employment counseling. That's a tough one because it's really based on the individual. I think the mistake that newcomers come is that they think they're going to get a job. As soon as I come into Canada, I am going to get a job. And most people get a rude awakening. They think that the jobs are there. Well, the jobs may be there, but are you ready for a job in Canada? Do you know what the work environment is in Canada? Do you know how to write a resume? Do you know how to look for a job in Canada? Do you know how to connect with people who are in the same field in Canada? So that's the thing that I find with newcomers coming in and thinking that they'll immediately get a job. That's not the case. If you get a job immediately, you are very lucky. But it doesn't happen. I think that happens because people come thinking that they are going to get a better life, right? And also people come, they don't have the full information about the Canadian environment, what it takes to get a job. So I find that if people knew what it takes for them to come here to get a job, people will be more prepared. People will be making more research in terms of where are the jobs, okay? What do I need to get a job in Canada? I have my qualifications. These qualifications, when I go to Canada, are they accepted in Canada? Do I need to do more, right? Because most people, when you come here, if you are a doctor, you still have to write exams. If you are a nurse, you still have to write exams, right? Even for myself, when I came, I had my human resources diploma, but I needed to get a designation. I had to go through the same courses again and write exams for me to get that designation. So those are some of the things that newcomers don't realize or they don't have that information before deciding to move to Canada. In real life, in terms of a newcomer, there are challenges that you face, right? As again, I said, assimilation, belonging, okay, belonging in a Canadian environment. What does it belonging look like to you? Like, for me, it's being able to be accepted. If I'm at work, to be accepted for who I am, all right? Although I am an immigrant, as a newcomer, to be accepted that I can contribute, to the organization, that what I learned, the experiences that I learned in my previous country still apply in terms of me being able to do a good job. First of all, finding accommodation. Finding accommodation when you're a newcomer, it's hard, right? When I moved with my children, we first moved into a hotel for 2 weeks. Okay, a friend of mine had paid for us to move into that motel, and we started looking for accommodation for ourselves. We couldn't, not because that there were no apartments available. There were. We didn't have any references. Nobody knew us. We were strangers. So we couldn't find accommodation until someone else, a friend here in Peterborough, invited us to come and live with them. And we did live with them for 6 months, and they became our reference for us to get an apartment. The other thing is, well, when we came, I couldn't get a credit card because I had no reference, I had no banking information in Canada. I had to put down $1,000 for them to give me a credit card. So those, simple things, trying to settle down in Canada, the small things, they are huge for newcomers, especially accommodation, right? And being accepted where you're treated differently because no one can vouch for you. Yeah, I think people don't understand sometimes why people move to their countries, right? People move from their countries for different reasons, right? Some are coming because they are persecuted. Some are coming because of the war, okay? Some are coming because of traumatic situations that they experienced in their previous countries. People don't know the history behind each and every immigrant. So people, sometimes they can judge immigrants to say, okay, why are they here, right? Why did they come here? People don't know why people came. Okay, people don't know the situations. And really, as immigrants, you don't go about telling everybody about your situation because some of those experiences are very traumatic, right? So I think that's one of the things that people don't understand. It's why you are here. What brought you to Canada? I don't think really it's changed me. It's just that I hadn't worked with many immigrants. I was an immigrant myself, right? So I really can't say that I'd worked with a lot of immigrants before the Ukrainians. But when they came, I had no experience working with immigrants. I was learning myself. But what I did was to listen to their stories, to listen to what they were looking for, understanding also their backgrounds, their educational backgrounds, and trying to find a way of helping them, right? To figure out, where do I start, right? I was a doctor, I was a nurse, I was a lawyer. What do I need to do? right? Helping them to understand that, you know what, you'll have to start from the bottom, right? Start from the bottom, and as you progress, you may be able again to eventually work in your own field, right? If you're a doctor, maybe you're going to go through another process of writing exams. If you're a lawyer, probably you're going to again write exams. It will take time, but it's possible. My book covers a lot of stuff, personal stuff for myself in terms of my early life in Zimbabwe and moving to Canada. That book really looks at courage, courage to make difficult decisions for you and your family. Also, perseverance, the struggles that you experience in life, and not giving up, okay? Always being hopeful, and also leaning on people that you know, leaning on friends that can help you, but always being focused on your goal. What is it that you want to achieve? For me, it was a better life, secure life for my children. That I write in my book are one, looking for a job searching. That was a challenge for me, finding jobs, because I used to travel like to Toronto, for interviews, right? No job. I got my first job as a human resources manager because of a connection, what we call networking, right? So a friend of mine, her daughter was a friend who had their father who was a recruiter, right? So they mentioned about me looking for a job. And then he met with me and said to me, okay, tell me about what you did in Zimbabwe. So I did explain what I did in Zimbabwe as a human resources manager. And he said to me, you know what? You do have the right experience and qualifications. You should be able to get a job, right? I said, how can I? I've been applying. He says, no, I am going to recommend you. He did recommend me to a job. And my first job as a human resources manager was with community living here in Peterborough. And that was through a connection. So connections in job search are very, very important. The other challenge that I had again was accent. People really not understanding you because you've got an accent. So I learned to speak slowly so that people could understand me. So those are some of the challenges. And also integration, feeling that you are part of a community. It takes a lot for you to feel that you belong to a community. Yeah, I think people who build their lives earlier are those people who are willing to learn, right? People, I can say, like for immigrants, people who know that they have to start afresh, right? I've seen people who struggle. They come here, they are looking for jobs which they had before in their country. They don't get the jobs, they get discouraged, almost go into a depressive state because they cannot understand why they can't get the jobs that they had before, right? Because they had the skills. Why is it that they can't get the jobs before? So people who are in that kind of mindset, it takes them longer to really get a footing in the job market because they are still holding on to the jobs that they had before. But those who are willing to say, you know what, okay, I was maybe, a lab technician, I can start as a personal support worker so that I can add some money. And then I'll be able to write my exams and end up again in the same field that I was at home. Or people who are willing to look at jobs differently and think, okay, you know what, this is what I did in my former country, but I think there are opportunities here. I can do something different. So I think it's a case of the mindset. Okay, for if you are going to be holding on to the past, you are not going to move. If you are willing to change, look at other opportunities and apply yourself, you can move forward very quickly. What I would say to an immigrant before they come to Canada is that have a very clear understanding of the Canada environment. Know what Canada is about. Know where you want to settle. Okay. A lot of people settle in Ontario, but there are also other provinces because sometimes smaller provinces have got better opportunities in terms of jobs. So do your research. Find out more about Canada. Find out more about where you want to live. Find out more about where the jobs are. Okay, what do you need to do when you come to Canada? Your qualifications. Okay, if you are a doctor, you know that you cannot practice without, right, writing Canadian exams. So what do you need to do? How do you prepare yourself, right? Your certifications that you have, they have to be evaluated against Canadian standards. You can do that before you come to Canada so that you know, do I need to upgrade or are they acceptable? So I would say do your research before you come to Canada. Okay, what I can add about newcomers in Canada is that we come from different communities, and it's very important to identify your community as well, right? I am Zimbabwean, right? We do have a Zimbabwean community in Canada in different provinces and here in Ontario, and we get together, you know, and that helps a lot if you're a newcomer with your own community because you've got the same things that you can talk about, right? You don't feel lonely. You know, there are things that you can share, you know, your own stories, your own foods, right? The things that you love doing back home. So I would say that connecting, you know, with your community, I mean, if you're from Mexico, if you're from Ukraine, if you're from another country, try and see if you can connect with other people because that becomes also your own social support, you know. I'm not too sure about other cultures, but like in my culture, it's a community. A community, you are always there for each other. You help with each other. So I would encourage people to always, you know, find their communities, you know, but at the same time, also try to integrate, right, with the Canadian community as well, so that you can also fit in, right? And the other thing as well that I would add is that the working culture is different in Canada from maybe most of the newcomers. The way you relate to your boss, the way you relate to others at work is different. Time management, in some countries, time is fine, it's okay, but here you have to be on time, and also you have to be able to contribute to discussions, right? So that power distance of higher authority and lower authority, right? Which I was used to, I have to listen to my boss. I can't challenge my boss, right? That is different in Canada here. You are supposed to contribute, right? I always tell also people that even just greeting somebody, right, is different, right? At work, we wouldn't say John, it was Mr., Mrs., right? But here it's first name, right? So I always encourage newcomers, all right, here it's first name, it's different, right? I know where we come from. You have to be respectful of elders, but here at work, you call each other, by first name. So those are some of the things that I think as newcomers, right? Just understanding how things are done in Canada can go a long way for you to be able to integrate well at work.